We continue our examination now of the recent disclosure of top U.S. secrets with two of the nation's leading experts on national security. Joe Lieberman is chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, and General Michael Hayden is former director of the CIA. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Good morning. Thank you.
As you look at this extraordinary series of leaks, everything from the double agent inside al-Qaeda in Yemen to the details about the U.S. and Israeli joint cyber campaign against Iraq. And let me start with you, Senator Lieberman. How much damage has been done to our national security?
In my opinion, an enormous amount of damage has been done to our national security. I mean, in the case of the cyber attack on Iran, if the articles are true, this is the first confirmation of that. Some methods of how it was carried out were telegraphed to the Iranians. I think there's a danger that it may legitimize an Iranian or terrorist counter cyber attack on us because we did it in the case of the underwear bomb from al-Qaeda on the Arabian Peninsula. Again, these leaks jeopardized that operation, potentially put the individual who courageously infiltrated AQ on the Arabian Peninsula in danger, and his family. Will discourage people in foreign intelligence services from cooperating with us in the future. Finally, in the case of the Osama bin Laden kill, the fact that we leaked the story that a doctor was retained to carry out a vaccination program to try to get DNA from people in bin Laden's compound led the Pakistanis to the doctor. And he's now been convicted and sentenced to 33 years in jail. Who's going to cooperate with us next time as a result of that? So, yes, these leaks compromise the security of every American.
General Hayden, I want to pick up on what Senator Lieberman said. Are some of these leaks giving away what's known as sources and methods, the holy grail of intelligence, and especially in the case of the alleged U.S.-Israeli cyber attack against Iran, does it invite retaliation by the mullahs in Tehran?
Oh, I think so. And to reiterate a point the senator made, these don't have to be true to be harmful. So you take the Stuxnet story. It's almost
That's
like
the computer virus that
yes.
allegedly we used against the Iranians.
Right. That's taunting the Iranians. Imagine this. My counterpart, when I was director of CIA, was Qasem Soleimani. I can just picture him now going to the supreme leader, Khamenei, and saying, you know those things we discussed a year or two ago, Mr. Supreme Leader, and you told me to put on the back burner. Well, I think it's now time to resurrect those ideas. I mean, it sort of legitimates an Iranian response, whether the story is true or false.
General, in the cyber warfare story that appeared on the front page of the New York Times, you are quoted as saying this, and let's put it on the screen. This is the first attack of a major nature in which a cyber attack was used to effect physical destruction. Somebody crossed the Rubicon. Didn't you, at least indirectly, confirm the leak?
No. In fact, I was quite clear. I'm totally agnostic as to who did this, but it is accepted knowledge and public knowledge that this happened. Whoever did it crossed a policy barrier, made a decision that in a time of peace, one could use a cyber weapon to effect physical destruction on what another nation could only describe as their own critical infrastructure.
But you in no way confirmed that the U.S. was involved
No,
in
not at all.
Okay. As we discussed with David Plus, some of the people quoted in these articles, not saying that they were the ones who gave up these specific secrets, but the National Security Advisor, Tom Donilon, the former White House Chief of Staff, Bill Daley, and quoted as specifically giving up some of this, members of the president's national security team who were with him in meetings in the Situation Room. Question for you, Senator Lieberman. Do you have any thoughts about who was leaking these stories and why?
And I don't have any thoughts about who was leaking the stories, but we ought to try to find out, and that's what the investigation in the Justice Department ought to do. There's nothing new here about leaks in Washington, and this happened during the Clinton, Bush, and earlier Obama administration in Bob Woodward's books, for instance. But the recent series of leaks are the worst in a long time. I think we're on a slippery slope where people think there's no accountability if you leak. And we've got to change that. I think we've got to change the law that's applied here. The last person to be convicted of a crime for leaking to the media was more than 25 years ago. We're still using a 1917 Espionage Act that requires some showing of intent, a knowledge that a leak would harm the security of the United States. But, Chris, it seems to me that the law ought to say simply, if you disclose without authority classified information, you've committed a crime. Because for information to be classified, there was a judgment made that its disclosure would cause damage. In the case of top secret information, which a lot of this was, it would cause exceptionally grave damage to the security of the United States. So this is something that has to be found out. One last point. David Sanger says in the...
He was the fellow who wrote
the New York Times
the
piece.
cyber warfare, and he's written a book on this subject.
Right. He says that his writing is based on conversations with high-ranking officials in the U.S. government and other governments who don't want to be identified because the information they shared is highly classified and relates to some ongoing operations. Well, that's an acknowledgement of a crime, in my opinion, and that's why the Justice Department ought to get to the bottom of it.
Let me follow on this with you, General Hayden, because you've been in these meetings. You've been in the Situation Room. How closely held is this kind of information? You know, we are talking about sources and methods. We are talking about agents that we had in those countries. We are talking about a major campaign against Iran. How closely held is the information? And do people just leave the room and go out on their own and leak this kind of information?
Well, they shouldn't, certainly. And this is very closely held information. Again, without commenting on whether the stories are true or false, if you follow the storyline that David Sanger lays out, this would have been a covert action. Covert action requires the personal involvement of the president, his personal approval. And there are few things in the American government that are as closely protected as covert actions are. I mean, after all, the word covert has some meaning, or at least it's supposed to.
Do you think that it was political? Do you think this was an effort to shine the president's record on foreign policy?
On the Stuxnet leak and on the Sanger article, first of all, I'm reluctant to pass judgment, but I'll believe what David Sanger said. This wasn't in any way a press release from anyone, so to speak. He picked this up in bits and pieces through very good reporting. But that, however, doesn't indicate that some of that reporting didn't come from sources who were privy to this information.
Senator Lieberman, let me ask you some of the same questions that I asked David Plouffe. Do you think the president should, as George W. Bush did, order his entire staff, anyone who knows about these leaks, come forward?
I do. I mean, the president made very clear in the statement that you played earlier that he was outraged that anybody would think that anybody in his White House was leaking classified information. I think the next step is to ask all of them to come forward in just the way you said.
Do you think he should agree, as President Bush did, to sit down with federal prosecutors for interrogation?
Well, that's up to him. But look, we're in a situation where I think the administration ought to do everything it can to eliminate any appearance that people in the administration leaked this highly classified information for political or other personal purposes. And I leave it to the president's attorneys. But if I were advising him, I'd say he should sit down and talk to the investigators.
Finally, back in 2003, you said that we needed a special prosecutor and independent counsel in the Valerie Plame case. Given the extent of these leaks and the fact that top administration officials, not by name, but are quoted as having been the sources, does there need to be a special prosecutor?
Chris, I've been thinking about this since these leaks came out, and I've reached a conclusion, which is that we do need a special counsel. And we need a special counsel because a special counsel avoids any appearance of conflict of interest. Special counsels, independent counsels before them were created for a situation exactly like this, where people might reach a conclusion that investigators, U.S. attorneys even, working for the Attorney General who was appointed by the President, cannot independently and without bias investigate high officials of their own government.
So you're saying the U.S. attorneys that have been appointed by General Holder, or Attorney General Holder, not enough, special prosecutor?
Yeah, not enough. And of course, I have no reason to distrust or disrespect either of these U.S. attorneys. But here we've got one gentleman who gave a contribution to President Obama. No matter what he concludes, people are going to say it was biased. Here's the big difference between a regular U.S. attorney and a special counsel. The special counsel is not under the day-to-day supervision of the Attorney General. He's really much more independent. And I think that's what, frankly, I think Attorney General Holder would do the administration and himself a favor if he appointed special counsels in this case, because it would remove any appearance that anybody in the administration was trying to block a full-scale investigation and protect anybody in the administration who may have leaked.
We're going to have to leave it there. Senator Lieberman, General Hayden, thank you both so much for coming in today to discuss these matters of vital national security. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.